Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today on software cost reduction and improving patch security through application estate optimization. On today's call, you have myself, Mark Shirley from App Technology, and we also have Ben Cook here from Management Studio. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how optimizing your application estate can help you reduce software costs and also improve your overall patch and security posture. So there are a number of challenges out there in understanding your application estate. Firstly, simply knowing what's out there. Typically, we find that most enterprises have far more applications installed than they realize. Secondly, rather than just providing an audit of what's installed, we can show you which of those applications are actually being used out there versus just sitting, consuming licenses and potentially creating risk. Thirdly, we can help make sense of confusing inventory data. Different tools report applications in different ways, sometimes with multiple returns, making it really hard to understand the data and get to a single source of truth that makes sense. And finally, when you do have multiple proper versions of applications in the estate, we can help you understand those and look to rationalize down towards common versions for your enterprise. And these four challenges are often when most enterprises get stuck. So how can we help with this? Well, the first way we solve this is by moving raw data that already exists in your estate. Tools like SCCM, Intune, Active Directory, Entra have a lot of structured information. And what we can do is turn that into actionable knowledge. So it takes that messy, disconnected data sitting in your estate, sitting in existing tools, and it turns it into a clear, decision-ready view of your estate. So beating the bloat. So once you have that knowledge, it gives you a clear understanding of what applications are being used and by whom. So not just what's installed, but allowing you to drive down those numbers. And from there, you can rationalize the number of applications under management. Typically, for most organizations we work with, we see around a 70% reduction in application count from the beginning of this process through to the end. You can identify where multiple versions of the application can be consolidated down into a single supported version. And all of these expose opportunities for license savings because you stop paying for software that nobody's using. So less is more. And why does this matter? Well, because less genuinely is more here. Fewer applications in your estate to manage means fewer applications that need patching, which directly improves your C+ patching compliance. It reduces the overall cost of managing your EUC estate, driving down your total cost of ownership. And with fewer applications, you can improve your software asset management, moving to a model where you're licensed based on actual usage, not on install counts. You can look at consolidations options if you're licensed across multiple versions in your organization. And from our experience, these license savings really add up. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hand you over to Ben. Ben will take you through a demonstration of the Management Studio tooling. And yeah, hopefully this will cover a lot of the areas that you'll be interested in on. So Ben, let me just make you the host.
Great, thanks ever so much, Mark, for that intro. So my name is Ben Cook. I'm a Senior Product Specialist at Management Studio. I've been working with the organisation for quite some time now, and I've been involved in lots of application projects. I used to also be an application packager for my sins, so I've got some pretty good hands-on experience with applications and managing big estates. And I'm going to talk you through some of the features in Management Studio that are going to help you guys manage your application estates and hopefully reduce that total cost of ownership. Now, Management Studio can do and does do a huge amount of things, but today we're focusing just on the application side of things. So there's going to be four key areas that I'd like to talk about. One is application discovery. Then we're going to talk about normalization, rationalization, and finally the ongoing maintenance of that application estate. So I'm going to have a quick chat about each of those, and then we'll jump into Management Studio so you can see the solution in action and hopefully see how it can really help with those challenges we've got. So firstly, discover. As you probably know, discovering the application estate is absolutely critical in getting control of it. We've got connectors which are configured in Management Studio, which allow us to reach into those systems which Mark mentioned, the things like Intune and MECM and Active Directory and Entra, other systems as well. And they allow us to take daily feeds of those applications. And again, as Mark mentioned, it's not just about understanding which applications are out there. It's about understanding some metrics around them as well. So who is using the applications and which devices are they using them on? When did they last use them? So that gives you a really good starting point in having a better understanding of the estate. Now, we don't need to install an agent on the endpoints, and that's because we're using those existing data sources, the ones that I mentioned just a moment ago. And it's not limited to those that myself and Mark mentioned. We can also bring in data from ServiceNow. We've got a connector for that. And quite often, organizations might have data stored in Excel, application data, and we can bring that in as well. So we can bring that in automatically on a regular basis or just as a one-off import. And that's a really nice starting point in terms of getting that baseline into Management Studio. And I'm just going to jump into the solution now for a moment and show you some of that data. So this is the Management Studio client. If I come into the applications area here and look at all of the applications, there's a few things you'll notice. We've got the application workflow down on the left-hand side here, and I've got a list of apps. Now, just before I get going, the applications are basically in two different areas. We've got the accepted applications. Those are the applications which have already been marked by somebody in the organization as in scope. And Management Studio does help with making those decisions, which I'll show you later on. But that's the in scope view, and that's where we come into by default. We've also got an area called the pending apps, and that's the triage area. And I will jump into that later on because I'm going to show you what it looks like when applications are discovered by the connector. But for now, I just want to show you a bit of data. So if we were to say, come into one of these applications, let's have a look at this Adobe Digital Editions, we get some metadata about the application in here. But we get some information about the users. So these are the people who have used that application, and these are the devices where it's being used. And depending on the data source, we will get things like a last used date. And we can view this data from also a kind of a user angle or a device angle. So if I were to go into user migrations and maybe open up Sean Banks. So this is one of our users. This user would have come in probably through Entra or maybe Active Directory. We can then see the applications that Sean has run. And we can see which devices that's been run on as well. We can either see it in here or we can expand this view in here. So it gives us a really good starting point in terms of understanding what's out there. But one of the big challenges is, and this is where we come on to the normalization, vendors tend to not be consistent in their naming standards. And if you take an individual vendor, and I'm not going to point fingers anywhere here, but if you take any of the big software vendors and you look at the way they've called themselves, so when they release software, there will be a vendor name. It will vary tremendously. And that's a bit of a headache because if you want to look at all of, say, your Microsoft or Adobe products, and they're all using a different name, it's difficult to do so. So we need to normalize this data. Quite often on projects, people do it manually, which is slow and painful. We've got some automation to assist with the normalization, which is fantastic. It's called the Asset Confidence Engine, and you'll notice the AI on the end there, which is going to help with that auto normalization. And what it does is it's got a database of consistent names so that it can apply those. And it's not just the naming, it's also the versions. Quite often vendors will put strange alphanumeric characters in the versions, so we can convert those all to actual true numbers. And the reason we need to do that is if we're comparing versions, we can't have text in there. We can't have alphanumeric. We can't have alpha. We need it to be numeric. So we convert all of those versions into pure numbers. We've also got the ability to add in software categories so that you can group your products or your estate by a category. So I'm going to jump back into Management Studio now and just show you how the normalization works. So if I come back into my applications, now I mentioned the pending before. I'm going to come into pending applications now. I think I'll just turn off my accepted. Yeah, let's just look at pending for a moment. So I'm just going to purely look at the pending apps. These are the apps as they come in raw from the connectors. And if we look at the Adobes, for example, you'll see that there are some variations in the way they've spelled their name or typed their name. So we need to clean this up. Now, I'm just going to have a look at Adobe Reader, I think, for now, just to keep things simple. So if I just search on Adobe Reader, I've got Adobe Reader and Acrobat Reader in here, but I want to clean up this vendor name. So I just select all of these. And then in the ACE drop-down menu here, I've got a normalization option. So I can come in here. Now it's going to make suggestions automatically, and there where it turns yellow. Normally the app name and version would also need doing, but I've done those previously, which is why I've only got the vendor name in there. And to correct those or to make them consistent, I literally just select them, approve them, they turn green, and then I apply those approvals. It does mean that you can be quite granular about this. You don't have to do them all in one go, but in this case, I just want to do them all in one go. And if I refresh my grid now, you'll see that we've got consistent naming. So this is something that we typically put into a scheduled job that happens every day after the connectors have run, so that the data is clean almost as soon as it's come into the system. But I just wanted to show you it manually for the sake of this demo. So that is cleaning up the naming. Let's now talk about the rationalization. And this is really the big ticket item. This is where we've got the challenge of lots and lots of different versions out there. And what typically happens with some products, things like AutoCAD, is different departments may need it at different times, and they'll go off and procure it their own way, and they'll get their own version, their own edition. And you end up with all of these different products from the same vendor scattered across the estate. And quite often what we need to do as part of the app rationalization is consolidate those all down to a single version. That's essentially what rationalization is. And the solution really does help with that rationalization. It can be done automatically, or it can be done manually, or a bit of both. And a bit of both is what most organizations do with this. Again, it's using the ACE engine to make it much easier. It provides confidence ratings. So one of the really nice things is what we're doing is harvesting all of our customer decisions in an anonymous way. And then we're basically able to give you a confidence rating. So if 90% of customers mark something as to be accepted or rationalized, then we present that 90% back to you. And I'll show you how that works. As Mark said, though, ultimately, what we're trying to do is reduce the application count so that we can reduce the costs of managing those software titles, and also potentially reduce our licensing costs. So again, jumping back into Management Studio, I'm going to again use these applications as an example, and this time I'm going to click on the rationalization option here. And you'll start to see, let's just make that a little bit bigger, that I've got, if I sort by name, it's a bit clearer, but at the top part of the screen, I've got my Acrobat readers, and the settings I've given it are basically roll every version up to the latest version. So it's found the latest version here, it's looked at all the earlier versions, and it's suggesting that they're all rationalized to that. You can see that in this to application column here. And then the bottom half of the screen is the same sort of thing, but just standard Adobe Reader this time. And again, I can do these ad hoc with the toggle, or I can just select them, approve them, and apply them. Now, what you may have noticed on the previous screen is, and I'll wait for this to run and I should be able to show you, is that for each of those application records, we had various numbers of users linked to them. So various numbers of users have used the different versions. It looks like the most popular is actually the latest one here. When we rationalize applications, what it does is it takes all of those users from the previous versions and rolls them up to the latest version. So this version here will now have all of my users linked to it. And the reason we want to do that is because when we then do that rollout of that latest version, we know exactly who needs that version. So if I just refresh my grid now, you'll see a slightly different view. I need to turn back on my accepted. So these are the two apps that I just rationalized. This is the one that had about, I think, 1,700 people in it a moment ago, and now it's got 3,000 in it. And that's because, like I say, we've forward pathed all those users from the previous versions to this version. And now we've got a good understanding of exactly who needs this version when we're going to do that rollout. So that was the manual way of doing rationalization. Obviously, you can have this automated in the background, and quite often people set up tasks or jobs that does that on a daily basis for certain vendors or certain applications. So quite often Chrome and Edge will be auto rationalized to the latest version on a daily basis. So that's all just managed in the background. Okay, that hopefully gives you a good understanding of how the rationalization piece works. Once you've done all of that, and once you've got all your applications up to date, you still need to maintain them. There's obviously going to be lots of things happening, things like updates, patches. As Mark said, we need to be maintaining those patch levels. One of the nice things is that we get daily application feeds. So those connectors still continue to run once we've done all of our application rationalization. And it still continues to add users to applications. It still discovers new versions of applications. So we can still keep an eye on what's going on in the estate and start to make plans. And this is where the automation and workflow comes in. So Management Studio provides all of this application workflow. You can see the processes down the side here. And this is the area that the applications team are typically going to be working in. They're going to be moving applications through those processes. And we've got automation in there as well. So we can do things like auto notification when an application hits a certain process. So maybe when it goes into UAT, certain testers get notifications. We've also got the ability to set up tests. So user acceptance testing. This is a feature within the solution where contacts of applications can be sent tests. That's an email that they get with a button they can click, and it takes them to our web portal. And in the web portal, they can go through a test form to make sure that all of the testing is captured and fed back into Management Studio so that the apps team can then take it to the next step. And the automation in the next step might be to promote it into a production environment. So it might be some automation around creating an application in Intune, for example. Other things that we can do are application owner survey. So this is a very nice feature, which is, it's a plugin actually, which means it's a very easy to install module that you add to Management Studio. Now I have done a full video on that, but just as a brief overview, what happens is in your applications, you can add application contacts. So if you open up any application in here, you can add contacts. So you can add your application owners in there. Now, I've set myself up as an application owner on a couple of the applications, or 3, I think. And what that does is every 6 months, and you can set that period, but every period it sends out an email to the application owners, and it says you've got some applications to review. Are you still the application owner, and so on. So I sent myself that email a little bit earlier on, and it just explains what's going on here. But the key is we get this application list here. And this takes me into my application owner survey. And in here, we get a bit of an intro again, but I can see which applications I'm the owner for. I get an overview down here of what process those apps are in. So it looks like one's in UAT and 2 of them are in live. I've also got the option to request a new app. But if I come into one of these applications, I can refresh that information. So I can put in things like if it's got an alternative name, warranty dates, end of life dates. We also, because we are getting so much app metadata from all of our customers, we can suggest that there might be a later version. In this case, we're running quite an old version 2020, but actually it's found that version 2026 is out there in the wild and that we might want to consider doing an upgrade. And that's, again, we've got that link to put in a new application request if that's what we want to do. But in terms of refreshing this, what I'm able to do is go through and make changes. So has the application name or version changed, licensing changes, or I can come up and I can say I'm no longer the application owner for something. So there is an option in there where you can enable a button where people say I'm no longer the owner for a particular product. And it really just maintains that application owner information without anyone having to actively go out and speak to people and ask people on a regular basis if they are still the application owner. Very powerful bit of technology. If we come back to our slides for a moment, finally, I did want to talk briefly about auto deployments. So something else we can do with our Intune connector or our AD connector or MECM connector is we're able to not just pull in data, but also push data back into those systems. And one of the things we can do with that is automatically deploy software. And it might be directly in Intune, it might be via an AD group. But you've got options to do that, again, based on automation. So it could be that you're doing some kind of transformation project and you have a migration date for a set of people. On that date, you're able to automatically add those people into the groups for the applications they need. Again, completely hands-off, which means that that project delivery is going to be much faster, much more slick, and less mistakes. So it's a really nice way of just sort of finishing off the maintenance of those applications. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to talk about some of the benefits of what we're doing here with Management Studio and managing your estate. So the discovery process is very easy and runs on a daily basis and gives you really good insights into what's out there. Something I should mention is we can do this across multiple infrastructures. And we've been doing this with a company at the moment who's got something like 20 different domains. We can do it with lots of different separate networks and bring them all into one instance so that you can consolidate all of that data in one. And we are actually doing a webinar later this summer all about that kind of environment where you're doing some sort of a merger. Fast patch management is going to be made much easier through all those application metrics, through understanding which versions are out there and who is using them and which devices they're being used on. The total cost of ownership, we're going to be able to reduce through those things I've already talked about, but also the auto normalization, rationalization, and we've got optimized application management. The auto deployments, they can save us a vast amount of time in terms of taking away manual deployments and doing things automatically. And finally, I want to talk again about the application owner survey, because again, that can save a huge amount of time in terms of managing the app contacts. And that is it from me. Mark, back to you.
Take myself off mute. Thank you ever so much, Ben. Let me get my screen shared again. So obviously with what we've walked through in the bit before Ben's demo and during Ben's demo, I think we've very clearly demonstrated where we can help in terms of bringing your application estate under control with rationalization and understanding it. We've talked through the benefits that that can have in terms of software asset management and driving down license costs. We have briefly touched on where this might help in terms of patching and compliance and C+, which was one of the other taglines for this webinar. So I wanted to dive into that just a little bit more on the next slide. So with C+, one of the major things is making sure that your estate is understood and is actively managed. And when we first, as an organization, started working with our C+ packaging processes, we pulled forward our ITRAM model, which is all about identifying, triaging, reporting, actioning, and monitoring your application estate. And this gives you a repeatable process to handle that estate and handle it on an ongoing basis rather than doing it as a one-off project. What I've got on the screen at the moment is just a little snapshot of that. It'd be absolute death by PowerPoint if I went through our whole checklist. If that is something that's of interest, please drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to share our ITRAM checklist with you. But what I wanted to recap on was how Management Studio can specifically help in this process. So identify is really straightforward. We've gone through this probably multiple times this demo. Management Studio will bubble up those applications, help you understand them, and bring that estate under management. It brings it under control and it helps you identify it. Triaging it. So Ben just walked through a number of these steps. So as you triage through that, you need to have processes in place. Management Studio provides those application workflows so that you can make sure that you've got entry points for applications, you've got retirements and end of life, and you're capturing critical information like application ownership, which is essential for making sure that your estate is actively managed and controlled. Reporting. Again, through Ben's demo, we saw screens that dashboarded up applications in the estate, the business owner survey that comes back and tells you what you own. So again, with this tooling, it gives you that ability to have live reporting back to your application stakeholder estate to make sure that everything is under control. With the action stage, we've got all these automation processes. Again, Ben touched through these as we're going through, just to make sure that you've got audit points, checkpoints, processes to make sure that as you're taking those applications through, that everything is following the same process, the same standards, it's capturing the same information, it's recorded in the same place. So you get that full visibility and change control and change path for your application. And then finally, that monitoring step. Again, with that Management Studio in place, it gives you the ability to track your applications from cradle to grave, but also where Ben was talking through the pending queue, it also allows you to spot where applications are appearing in your estate. So, one of the biggest threats that you have is applications just suddenly popping into life. With Management Studio in place, it gives you that capability to step in really early on, understand who's got an application that shouldn't be there, and deal with it. So if you are looking at getting yourself very CE plus compliant, making sure you've got the processes in place to keep that fully up to date, something like Management Studio will be very key to helping you with that process. So finally, thank you ever so much for your time today. I hope you found this session useful. If you're at all interested, we can absolutely look to set up a free EUC estate assessment to walk through all of this on your estate. I'll be sending out a summary after this session. So if there's any questions that you've got from this session, please don't hesitate to share them out. Ben slightly stole the punch from me on this one earlier, but yes, we will have the next we're doing a series of 4 over this summer. The next session is doing a deep dive into where this can really help, specifically focusing on organizations that are doing lots of mergers and acquisitions, or if you're in the process of something that's coming up in your future, and how we can accelerate that discovery and look at how we can assist with transition planning for that merger. And that's going to be on Wednesday, the 29th of July at 11 a.m. So I think that's it from me today. Thank you ever so much for joining. Thank you, Ben, for the demo. And at this point, I will stop the webinar. So yes, thank you, everyone.